amid growing concerns about economic growth.
Consumer spending was
As
soft.
expected, cut interest rates another quarter point.
We are following breaking news. All three major American stock markets have closed down.
Bitcoin rose 10%.
Even gave the stock market a temporary second win.
The market reaction, it was kind of nonplussed.
Tariffs going into effect tomorrow.
But the NASDAQ was also.
Investors will be watching closely for more clues about the direction.
It's time to tune out the noise and tune in to great information with a steward's view. Expect valuable economic updates, investing techniques, and planning concepts that move you to be wise and decide well. With your host, Aaron Kolkman, president of Fidere Advisors in Minneapolis. You'll be equipped and encouraged in a stewardship mindset, managing God's resources 1 week at a time with a steward's view. A Steward's View is brought to you by Fidere Advisors, a registered investment advisor. You can listen to this podcast and previous episodes at fidereadvice.com. That's FIDERE advice.com. Now here's your host, the president of Fidere Advisors, Aaron Kolkman.
Welcome back to A Steward's View. I'm Aaron Kolkman. So glad you joined us again. Remember to visit this and previous episodes on our website and subscribe on your favorite platform. Follow, like, and share on SoundCloud, Spotify, and soon iTunes, even YouTube. Before we get going, Chaz, anything else?
No, brother. I think we're ready to go. Yeah, you going to start with a joke this week?
Oh, I'm fresh out of jokes right now, but maybe our special guest, Paul Larsen, has some.
I was going to say, you beat me to it. I was going to say, we got something better than a joke.
Yeah, way better. Okay, so now let's dive in. Last week, the S&P 500 closed in the green, snapping a streak of 4 straight weekly losses to close the week at 5,667, which was about 0.5% to the upside. The NASDAQ 100 was also positive, up 25 basis points, while small caps rallied 63 basis points, or 0.63%. International stocks jumped 0.75%, while the MSCI Emerging Markets Index rose a little over 1%. In fixed income, yields were lower, with the 10-year Treasury falling 7 basis points, or 0.07%, to 4.25%, and the 2-year Treasury also fell by the same amount, down to 3.95%. Transitory is back, as Jerome Powell said his legendary word during the press conference after the Federal Open Market Committee meeting on Wednesday. We haven't unpacked all of what that means, Chaz, the FOMC, but we will in future weeks. In particular, he stated that the impacts of tariffs are likely to be transitory on inflation. Overall, economists were split on whether or not the meeting was hawkish or dovish. The way it went, the number of forecasters who saw one or no cuts to short-term interest rates yet this year went from 4 in December to 8. And then on the dovish side, let's see, the Federal Open Market Committee reduced quantitative tapering, and we can talk about that in future weeks as well. And so there's a lot going on economically. Some of the uncertainty yet comes from the Atlanta Fed's very own GDP Now model, and that is a conversation in itself. The model captured a lot of headlines in late February when it suddenly predicted a large contraction in the first quarter following the release of the trade balance report. The model currently forecasts negative 1.8% growth for first quarter GDP. However, on Wednesday, the Atlanta Fed will be releasing a new version that removes the impact of gold imports. These imports increased from $13 billion in December to $32 billion in January and are believed to have impacted the Fed's model by as much as 2%. It will be a wait and see as we go in terms of tariffs, as reciprocal tariffs are expected to be released by the Trump administration on April 2nd. That's next week. And we have some more upcoming economic data next week that we'll talk about later in the program. But that's last week. It was a big week in the markets, big week economically. For today, I'd like to take a step back and talk a little differently about stewardship, and specifically aspects of stewardship that are not financial. So we've talked about for 3 weeks now some very, very detailed things that are going on around us, and some ways to consider navigating the macro environment that we just read from. Okay. But when we take a step back and we talk about what stewardship is in a bigger picture sense, that's where we need to really reconsider definitions, scope, and even our frames of reference. Today, I'd like to welcome a special guest. Joining us today is Paul Larsen. Paul is the Chief Stewardship Officer and Relationship Manager at Fidir. He brings a unique background. His background in theology, as well as extensive investment experience, makes him uniquely equipped to talk about the topics that we have for today. He's often called Pastor Paul at Fidir, with his unique ability to offer counsel that integrates biblical wisdom with financial decision-making. For more information about Paul, please visit fidiradvice.com/Larsen. That's Larsen. Again, fidiradvice.com/Larsen. So, Paul, I could go into your bio further, but let me just say welcome, and how's it going?
Great day. Spring has sprung.
So we were just talking offline about some thoughts you had already about this topic of stewardship and where it comes from. But what comes to mind when we talk about that topic, and what's on your mind in regards to it?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that every grown-up, at least, is a steward. All day, every day, you're making stewardship decisions. Now, you might do well, you might do poor. You might be accidental as a steward, or you might be intentional. But everybody is practicing stewardship all day. It's not a compartmentalized part of your life. And that's one of the big takeaways I hope people get over time.
Mm. So, how would you encourage our listeners to consider the various forms of stewardship? And maybe we should even identify what some of those are besides financial stewardship.
Well, really, the study of stewardship is a study of economics. And the study of economics is a study of how individuals, businesses, so on, allocate finite resources that have multiple uses. So again, we're making economic decisions all day, every day, because resources are not just money or capital or natural resources. They are also our time and our talents, our abilities, our know-how. So everybody is having to make decisions all day long about how they're going to apply the resources they have and how they're not going to deploy them.
Mm. So do you have any thoughts about how we view money in this context?
Well, money tends to be the default because it's a measuring tool. I think that's, we measure the market. We measure our salaries. We measure our bonuses. We're measuring things all the time. We want a way to measure things. But it's not really very helpful. Money is a big deal, but money itself is not good or bad. Mm. Money is simply, it's a tool that can be used well or used wrongly.
So what biblical references do you think would be a help to our listeners in regards to bigger picture stewardship and what stewardship really is?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of scriptures that are used poorly when it comes to money. Unfortunately, what I have found is stewardship in the church tends to default to fundraising. It doesn't even raise up to the level of philanthropy, because philanthropists have a purpose for what they're doing. It tends to distill down to fundraising. And that's very unfortunate, because it's not so much how much we get people to give at church. It's what they dare do with what they dare keep when it comes to money.
Mm. And so how can we think about this then when we say, okay, I'm going to be a steward today. I'm going to steward all of my resources, all of what I have available. Yes, we want a measuring tool. Yes, we have some ideas about what that looks like. But, I'm hoping that we can get to some of the things you were just saying even before the program started. And that is, where does it come from?
Where do our resources come from?
Where does stewardship come from?
Well, actually, sometimes when I speak to groups, I'll ask a question. I'll say, who can tell me what the first Great Commission is? Now, half the group will try to quote Matthew 28. The other half will say, what do you mean first? But it's a trick question because the word commission's not in the Bible. But what a commission is a mandate. It's an assignment. And the first assignment ever given to mankind, not just Christians, but every human being made in God's image, is in the first chapter of the Bible. As a matter of fact, it's the first thing God says to man, which is to be fruitful, multiply, take dominion over all the earth. That's basically, the theologians call that the cultural mandate. It's the command to make more.
Hence, stewardship is about economics, right?
It's about economics.
God's economy.
Yes.
Okay. This is reminding me of a lot of the Kingdom Advisor content that I've been through. Jerry Boyer is a well-known economist there that's done a lot with God's economy. So, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations over the last couple of years in regards to what the Bible says about stewardship. And, I'm very specific in client counsel to start with places like Matthew 6:24 that describes the decision that we all have to make in the master that we serve, right? That's either money or God, right? And we have to love one and hate the other. I mean, that's the language. And so that's where I go in conversations with some of the clients that are at Fidier whenever possible. But that's not to say that I have a complete view of stewardship when I'm doing that. I'm only trying to identify that I really have to align myself with what God has for me before I can make financial decisions, right? And so ideally, not in 2025 America, but ideally, we would have this longer dialogue about, well, what is it that God has for us, right? And then we can go all the way through what that looks like and end up with financial decisions, right? Instead of, well, I've got X amount of money and I'm measuring it this way, and the things you just mentioned about how stewardship ends up getting viewed, right? Which is just the measuring stick itself, right? Did I make more today than I did yesterday? Or did I, in my world, did I fund the goal, right? What was the rate of return that I got that was needed to fund the goal? Did I meet that? Okay, those things. But the way you're describing it, that's not complete stewardship.
Well, let's take the passage you just mentioned. The passage is, you cannot serve both God and money. Mm-hmm. How do we serve money? I mean, what does it mean to serve money? Does it mean to offer money a drink? Does it mean to help money get more comfortable in their chair? Mm-hmm. How do we serve money? Well, the way we serve money is by organizing all of our thoughts and all of our actions around getting more money. Because that's the way to think of service when you think of God versus money. We serve God. Well, we don't meet God's needs. How do we serve God? By getting more God, right? That's what he has for us. So when you talk about serving God or money, it's not so much do you worship it. It's what are you trusting to meet your needs and make you happy?
Okay. So where's my heart? Yeah. Okay. So it's a heart question. And
well, it's a desire question. Mm-hmm. It's an affection question. It's a hope and confidence question. It's all those things.
So then, one of the biggest idols that we can have, I'm going to kind of step forward, but a little bit sideways. One of the biggest idols we can have in the culture we're in right now is to serve or to think about money, to focus on money, to obsess on money, to make money our master. And so as an idol, what thoughts do you have about how we might come against that in our own lives, and how we can step back from it maybe? Because I'll say this, I know many excellent, genuine, believing Christian people who really struggle with this. And I've been one. I know others who are kind of recovering in this way also, some who aren't, as I'm saying. So it's a real issue as we go into, we're more and more into a digital life where numbers and data points and all the things. I mean, you just heard what I read from the economy in 1 week last week. So how do we get out of that mindset? Paul, I'd love for you to answer that question right after this.
More of A Steward's View in just a moment. Investors have stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, options, futures, real estate, and more. There's one place to look at all of your portfolio. It's called Fusion. Portfolio aggregation. No contract, no hassles. Fidere's portfolio technology gives its users a chance to see all of their assets all the time, wherever they are. The Fusion platform is open for use without a contract and without a hitch. It's based on mean variance optimization and analysis research by Aaron Kolkman. Fidere uses the Fusion platform to optimize assets for its clients. For more information, visit fidereadvice.com and click on Fusion at the top of the page. That's Fidere Advice, Fidere advice.com. Now back to A Steward's View with your host, Aaron Kolkman.
And we're back for the second half. Welcome back to A Steward's View. We're here with special guest Paul Larsen, Pastor Paul, if you will. You can visit Paul online at fidereadvice.com/Larsen. That's Larsen, fidereadvice.com/Larsen. Paul, I'm not sure I was succinct enough in my question before the break, and it goes like this. What can we do to get rid of money as an idol in our lives?
Well, first of all, let's define money. What is money? Okay, money is simple. It's simply it's a symbol that stands for human resources. Okay, money stands for what you can get from man, not what you can get from God. All right, money is the currency of human resources. Now, is that valuable? Sure, it's valuable, but it's not ultimate, is it? So think about verses like the love of money is the root of all evil, and how that verse has been maybe misquoted or misunderstood. Does it mean that there's a connection between every sinful attitude and money? That money's always on your mind when you sin? Well, that's not correct. So what does he mean? I think what he does mean is all the evils in the world come from a certain kind of heart, and that kind of heart loves money. Okay? So what does it mean to love money? Does it mean to admire green paper and shiny coins? No. The heart that loves money pins its hopes, pursues its pleasures, and puts its trust into what human beings can offer.
Human performance.
Yeah, what humans or what the human world can offer. And so a love of money or a trust in money or a belief in money is unbelief in the promises of God.
That's beautiful. Aaron, I was thinking, listening to Paul share, you guys are MSFs and CFPs and CKAs and all kinds of other letters, but it's all about money. And I was going to ask you guys, as you're thinking about this idea of, it's not necessarily the love of money or it's the focus on money. How do you gentlemen, as someone as men who steward money for others and help others steward well, how did you get to this place where you're like, we're going to focus on money, but we're not going to focus on money? How are we going to focus? How are we going to teach people to think about their money differently? Because when people, here's the deal, even if despite your best efforts, when people think of you guys, you two, and your industry in general, they think of dollar signs. So what you're talking about here is a little bit of a re-education or a reorganization in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's important. And one of the things that Aaron focuses on in his planning is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to fund goals. It's not the money. It's what are the goals that God has called us to. And retirement isn't a goal, it's a change. It's a change in how we steward our time. We don't have to steward it down at the shop or at the office. We have a little more time. How are we going to steward that time? And so to look at money as a tool instead of a goal.
Yeah, as a resource, but not strictly a human resource. Is that what I heard you say earlier, Paul?
Well, what I said earlier is money only represents what you can get from humans.
Right. Okay. So let's put it this way. It's a God-given resource, right? We talk about managing God's money. It's really God's tool for us, okay, to live life, to fund goals, to move forward in the ways that he would have us move forward. So one of the things I would add to this conversation, Chaz, in response to your question, has everything to do with goal setting. Okay. And if I have an opportunity in the next 1 or 2 decades in my own work life to become excellent at something that I'm already doing, it would be goal setting, which is the least technical part of all of the, the training that you tease me about, right? It's the part that no one else can answer but the individual or the couple or the family that is across or next to me. And that's because it's God-given, right? And so particularly for Christians, to have an understanding of their calling, to have an understanding of their direction, and then to start setting goals. That's a very different thing. I'll give you an example. It's different. To finish the statement, it's a very different thing than saying, well, I've got some financial goals. No. We're talking about life goals. I mean, I wrote a book about this. It's called The Life Cycle of Wealth. I've yet to plug it on this program. We'll get to that eventually. But
it's available on Amazon.
So the issue with life goals versus financial goals. And I think, Paul, you and I have talked about this a little bit in the office, but I could go into many, many examples of where I'll ask for the goal set. What is it you want to accomplish in your lives to typically a couple, but it could be an individual. And at least one person, if it's a couple, at least one of them will say, well, I want to pay for college. I want to retire, and I want to have X amount in savings. Okay. And so they're all numeric, right? Those are numeric things. And that's fine, right? That may or may not be an issue for that person with regards to where their heart is. Maybe they haven't done life goal planning before. And that's where, if I can say, my industry's even fallen short. It's that we're not really promoting a life goal kind of framework, right? Why not? Well, it's the same as economics. We're leaving God out. That's why. I do that too. So the idea then is, okay, let's strip away money for a moment, figure out our direction, right? What's our calling? And then set some realistic, you could call it benchmarks, right? Or stops along the way, not a 25-year vacation that America invented called retirement, but, maybe something about how you see your life in that particular stage, right? So that's a different question than, how do you want to retire, right?
Yeah,
so certainly.
I think that's right. And just even defining retirement,
Yep.
what does that mean? Does that mean pile up enough money so I can play golf the last 20 years of my life? Okay.
Yeah.
No, there'll be a day when you can't get up and do it anymore. And you don't want to be a burden. But at the same time, if what you're doing is building up enough wealth so you can play golf and go fishing for 20 years of your life, that's really that's an idol all by itself. Okay? Because we weren't made to relax in this world. We're preparing for the next. And so is recreation good? Of course it is. But to think we're going to be poor stewards of those last 15 or 20 years by just playing is I think that's a spiritual issue.
So, Chaz, are you feeling like we answered your question?
I have a follow-up. So let me ask you this, and this is a percentage question. This is to you, Aaron. How many of your clients do you think are followers of Jesus? Or believers in God? How about that? Because I got to think that shapes your conversation.
Sure. Well, it's not that different than the national norms that I've seen or numbers that I've seen, and that is to say about 2/3 are Christian in terms of how they identify themselves.
Sure.
Right. And about 10% of those are what I generally refer to as confessing Christians, right? People that are, out to follow Christ as their chief effort in their day-to-day life.
I asked the question because as I hear you guys talk, you're treading. You guys are financial experts. I'm going to call you that as a real general term without all your letters, but you're treading on the edge of philosophy and certainly of faith. And I got to think that if you come in with that mindset, the way you answer those numeric questions that you just asked a minute ago, your mindset, your focus may be different a lot of time. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm out to lunch on that, but I got to think at least the argument or your approach from a God-centered approach would be received differently, and people would be much more receptive to the kind of reorganization or going, wow, I've not thought about it this way.
Right. And I won't add to that, Chaz. Your comments stand on their own. I will say one thing about what it means to be a believer in the triune God, the Christian God, and that is that faith exists on a spectrum, right? I think we can agree that at some point we become aware of our belief. We become aware of our status with God, and we, as Jesus says, we even become reborn, right? And so that spectrum, I have many wonderful families to serve, and right now 8 different states, and they're all across that spectrum, right? So when I say, well, it's this percentage or this percentage, that's doing my best to group things. It does very little to explain the trajectory of the people that I'm serving. So I do get really unique opportunities, and one of the things I'd like to talk about is generational wealth planning, and I'll even take the word wealth out, just say generational planning, because that is where the number one risk, I write about this in my book, the number one risk that families face in making decisions about their financial resources is the risk of the transition of resources going from one generation to the next, right? 2/3, as high as 2/3 of those transitions fail. And they fail for non-technical reasons, right? They fail for relational reasons. Families that aren't communicating, right, across or up and down the family tree. And so that is the major reason that when I'm really engaging with particularly new families at Fidere Advisors, we're not focused on investing. We do that at the very end, right? That makes a lot of interesting conversations on the podcast, doesn't it? But
it's about goals. It's about life planning.
But how do we get to what's supposed to happen at the end and who's supposed to benefit, right? And that's actually its own bit of technical data to kind of bring along in the conversation. But really, this is the big deal, because if you can't answer whether you're seeing yourself as a born-again believer in following Jesus, or you're somewhere else on the spectrum that I just mentioned, if you can't answer who's supposed to benefit in the end, then you're really stuck, right? Chances are the government's going to benefit. Which one? Well, the state of Minnesota, the federal government, maybe, right? And so we end up with this sort of spinning wheel where we're just sitting there like a hamster trying to make better returns or pay less in taxes or lower our insurance premiums, all so that we can hand a chunk of it over to maybe the wrong place, often the wrong place, right? And so that risk, the risk of failing in your transferring an estate, is so significant and so real. I don't have a copy of the book in front of me, but there's plenty of reference in there to how this happens, and a large study that was done to this effect. And it just is to say that I'll borrow Stephen Covey's idea in a previous partner of mine that used it a lot, beginning with the end in mind, right? And so I can't emphasize enough to any listener that we have that the best thing you can do when it comes to setting your life goals is just that. It's to say, okay, sure, you could answer, do I have a will or a trust? But even before that, how do I envision my estate being handled, right? That which God has given me that I'm responsible for in this life, when I'm not here, when my spouse isn't here, when we're not here, how do I envision that transition? And I love being able to ask that question. I wish that more of my colleagues, started there. I won't say they don't, but I wish more did. And I encourage anybody that is thinking in terms of their life instead of their numbers first, to make that the very first thing that they consider. Paul, please, your thoughts.
I think maybe you're looking for a word or a term that we can work on talking about later. But just as we have limited the idea of stewardship to fundraising in the church, we've limited the idea of legacy to what we leave behind. And one of the reasons why it doesn't work generation to generation is not because there's a lack of money, a financial legacy that's left behind, but there's a mindset legacy that doesn't transfer. Okay? How did mom and dad deal with money? Well, they collected a bunch. Yeah, but how did they think about it? How is that being conveyed, or how is that being represented in how they're managing their wealth? And so I think that's kind of an important aspect to take some of these terms and let's explode them a little bit, so we can think in bigger terms. Stewardship as well as legacy. There's a lot we can cover, but I know that's your heart, Aaron. Is who benefits, and not just who benefits, but how do they benefit? Do they benefit with a mindset and a heart that pins its hopes on Christ, or are they is what you're leaving behind something that heirs can fight over?
Yes, the family conflict, and that's the question. Who and how? The two questions. So if we can then back up a little bit, I just want to say, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really good to interact and have you on the program. I know for sure that there are listeners who have looked forward to hearing what you have to say, and that tells me that there will be more, and that we'll have to have you back again very soon. So thank you very much for your contribution, and I look forward to seeing you again.
All right, my pleasure.
Okay, and so with that, let's take a look at the week ahead. On Monday, we will have preliminary March data for PMIs. Tuesday is the Philadelphia Fed meeting, Case-Shiller home prices, new home sales, building permits, Richmond Fed data, and Conference Board consumer confidence. The consumer confidence number will be of particular importance as it's unexpectedly dropped from 105 to 98 just in the past month, and I'm rounding. Consensus estimates are looking for a further decrease to 93 or 94, which would be its lowest reading since January of 2021. On Wednesday, we'll get data on durable goods and cap goods orders. Thursday, we have initial jobless claims, the second revision to fourth quarter GDP, the advanced goods trade balance report, and pending home sales. Finally, Friday, we'll close the week with PCE data and final March University of Michigan sentiment data. And we are closing a quarter too, so there's a lot going on. I want to thank our partners, Federated Hermes, for the macro data that we've shared today. They're a new provider of this concise information that I hope is a benefit to our listeners as well. Next week on the program, March 31st, we have Tim Riddle, former CEO of Chartwell Investments, and Teresa Tran, CFA from Chartwell Investments. Also, Teresa is the portfolio manager for TAAGX. That's the Timothy Plan Small Mid-Cap Growth Fund. She's one of the PMs for that fund. And Tim and Teresa will be on to talk about what they're seeing in the small and mid-cap growth space in the U.S. So looking forward to their time with us next week. And until next time, please do be wise and decide well.
You've been listening to A Steward's View with your host, Aaron Kolkman, president of Fidere Advisors. To learn more about Fidere Advisors or speak with Aaron, visit fidereadvice.com. That's FIDERE advice.com. While there, you can also enjoy the free Fusion platform for portfolio aggregation. Just click Fusion at the top of the page. To listen to this and other episodes of A Steward's View, visit the website Fidere Advice and click on A Steward's View podcast link at the top of the page. Fidere Advisors is a privately owned full-service life planning firm offering financial planning and asset aggregation. Asset aggregation systems are designed to align portfolios across accounts into a single, globally optimized investment plans for families it serves. Fidere maintains liquidity of client capital at major custodians and utilizes asset managers that have shown consistent historical performance through excellent risk management. This program is not an offer to transact any securities and does not constitute a financial planning engagement. Information provided has been prepared from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed and does not represent all available data necessary for making financial decisions and is for informational purposes only. Fidere and its representatives do not offer tax or legal advice through Fidere. Please consult the appropriate advisor. Fidere Advisors LLC is a registered investment advisor. To discuss your situation or to learn more about Fidere, please visit fidereadvice.com. That's FIDERE advice.com or call 833-2-FIDERE. That's 833-234-3373.